welcome to episode 1 of Eternal Legacies, Stories from the Tomb. This first one, the first episode I'm going to be focused on is Howard Hughes. And everyone knows the name. Everyone knows the name Howard Hughes. Everyone's heard about him in business. Everyone's heard about him in aeronautics. As you can see, there's planes and airplanes and things like that behind us. The airport's behind us. He was big in aerospace. He was big in the film industry. He was an inventor, an investor, he really was a brilliant man. And he lived, they said he lived from 1905 to 1976. And he was known for his eccentric behavior. He had OCD really bad, so he was kind of like a perfectionist when it comes to things. And one reason why a lot of people thought he was weird. He was just a lot of people with high intelligence, high IQs, are always thought of as weird or socially awkward. Because I've said it a lot, God doesn't give with both hands, guys. Like, if you get a lot of intelligence, then you might get socially awkward behavior, because you cannot socialize with normal people because you're so far ahead of them or above them in the intellect, sphere of things. Then he had chronic pain in his life from crashes, because one thing he was an adrenaline junkie. He loved testing his own inventions. How a lot of people they'll invent things and hire someone else to test them. Howard Hughes would invent an airplane or come up with an airplane or a car or a boat and test it himself. When he was a child, he built his own motorized bike by himself from a steam engine of his father's. The man was a genius from the time that he was a child. And we're going to talk about Howard Hughes in this episode. His company still exists. They still run. And he was one of the forerunners for aerospace development and engineering and creativity, the way that they fly. The Army even commissioned him to make a flying boat. The man was a genius. And he did it. He created one. So we're going to talk about that. We're going to talk about all the women he was involved with. We're going to talk about his story. The Hughes Aircraft Company he started in 1932. And Howard Hughes set a lot of air records by his inventions. And he had this idea in his head that he could go from one side of the U.S. in under the amount of time that any other plane or any other company was doing it. And he did it. He set multiple air records going around the world and from one coast to another. He set a lot of records doing that. His H-4 Hercules was the world's largest flying boat. And you heard that right. And it had the longest wingspan of any aircraft. And it was made out of wood, guys. They never thought he would get it off the ground. And he did.
Right now, and you understand why a wood plane would be so difficult.
But the weight alone, and the wood, the curvature of it.
No, well, okay, that would be an obstacle. But see, right now, planes are made out of aluminum. It's a 6061 grade aluminum. And every piece of 6061 grade aluminum is exactly the same. That's why it's a grade. Wood is not graded like that. So you can have a 2x4 here and a 2x4 right next to it, and they weigh totally different.
Right. It took him 15 years to build that. See, they commissioned him to do that during the war. Like we're talking about, y'all see in the war stories videos that we do, where they were commissioning a lot of people to do a lot of different things for them, the government was. And Howard Hughes, being the inventor he was, they said, we want you to build us a ship that can fly. And he goes, okay, but they didn't give him a time limit. They just gave him a bunch of money. So he said, okay. And so he just had this bunker and he just started building this plane. And even after the war was over and the plane was not done, he still finished that plane because he's what? OCD. He has to finish the plane. It had to be right.
See, Howard Hughes there was an old term we used in the day. I've not heard it recently, but it was called idiot savant.
Yes.
And it really was not a negative term. What it meant was that a person was just very intelligent, but they lacked a lot of social skills. And that describes him to a T.
Yes.
But a lot of folks may not realize that the reason Howard Hughes was so big into aviation is because it filled a large part of his childhood.
Exactly.
He was related, I can't exactly remember how it went, but to Glenn Curtiss.
And he was also second cousins to the Wright brothers.
So his relations there, but his friendship with Glenn Curtiss, and I'm sure he stole a lot from Glenn Curtiss's designs. When you look at the things he did, steam engine on a motorcycle, those type of inventions that he came up with. And motorcycles and airplanes, they seem different, but they're really very similarly related when you get down to it. Trust me, I know.
Oh, so is that how he did the transition so easily over from...
Yes, because the weight distribution, a lot of the attributes that you have to take into consideration when designing an airplane for, you know, its perfect weight, its balance, you have to do that on a motorcycle too. You can't have it too top heavy. You have to have the right rake and trail on a motorcycle, the same as an airplane. So the engineering from one to the other is not far-fetched. So, you know, that's where he got a lot of that start, was working with the Wright brothers. And he was at the golden age of aviation. It had just begun, and the only way to go was up.
Because of all of his impact, and because he was, and you got to remember, guys, he was also developing, went through his aviation company, he was making warplanes for the military, just general warplanes to the military. And in 1939, he was given the Congressional Medal of Honor for that. For his contributions just in the field of aviation, he was given that. Nothing else. No, I'm not talking about any of his other achievements. He was given that, for his contributions in the aviation field and the way that he helped the war effort at that time.
Right. And, you know, something we'll get into a little bit later, but in his military contracts, he was accused of of misusing the funds. He was accused, you know, mismanagement of funds. And when the investigation was done and over with, he ended up finding out that he had millions of his own money invested on top of the funds that were properly allocated for the experiments he was trying to do.
Right, because when he came up with an idea in his head, he was the type that was going to see it through the end. It didn't matter if it was a failure or not. It didn't matter to him. It was finishing the task. It was having that closure on it, right? So he had to have that. His OCD made him have to have that. Then he had neurosyphilis, which is something else we're going to go into. He contracted that, though, because of his sexual lifestyle. So that was a whole different set of situations. So that was working against him. But and he still finished all these projects. It might have took him longer. It might have delayed some. But all his projects were successful in the end.
Right.
Most of them were. I would say most of them. The flying boat never did take off. If you want to excuse the pun, the flying boat never did take off.
But his waterplane idea sure did.
Yes, it did. And now we have them everywhere, right? And then it was 1973 that they inducted him into the National Aviation Hall of Fame. And see, look at these planes.
You know, and I'll tell you what, you know, if old Howard was here today, he'd be pretty amazed at some of these planes.
Right, like this is on the back. This is called the Delta Dagger, the U.S. Air Force Interceptor. It intercepts stuff inside, up in the air before it gets close to us. They guard our airspace, guys.
I mean, some of these planes that are out here right now are just, they're amazing. And to think that the first airplane, I mean, the Wright brothers pretty much took a bunch of matchsticks, a couple sheets of paper, and glued an engine to it.
That's what they did, pretty much.
Pretty much the first airplane.
Yes. If you're ever out here, guys, and want to see these, they're on the backside of the Birmingham Airport. All you have to do is pull around here. There's a road that goes by. You can't get into the fence so easily, but you can walk on the outside and look at them.
And I don't know if they have it or not, but here's the thing. If anyone from this area or that works this base kind of catches this video, you need to make this open so we can get up a little bit closer and see some of these planes. I mean, they're all old, they're all stripped, there's no military secrets in it, and I would really love to crawl in one of those cockpits, just once.
Oh yeah, right? They're beautiful. Look how all they're designed. That's a massive one right there.
Yeah, see, that's a lot of what I was looking at too, is the size of these.
And you look at that cockpit up there. I can get in on that.
You know, and weight is always a restriction when you're going in the air.
Yeah.
That's why the aluminum's used.
Can you imagine why it took him so long to do the wood thing? Because the military wouldn't give him any metal, guys. They're not getting any metal. He's not getting any metal. They need all the metal for the war. Supersonic swinging fighter bomber.
And you know, I'll tell you something that really makes me feel safe as an American today, though. I'm walking and I'm looking at all these planes here. And they're impressive to me. They really are. But I feel good because in my mind, I know if they got these planes here this impressive, what have they not shown us? What's going to be revealed at the next war that you know, when our grandchildren are walking through a museum, they're looking at those planes that we don't even know about yet.
We're at a graveyard in southern Alabama. I'm not going to tell you which city in southern Alabama in case they really do want to keep this secret like they've been talking about. You'll understand what I'm talking about in just a second. Now, the reason we're at this graveyard is because a woman named Eva McClellan is here. And we're going to continue on into the Howard Hughes story and talk about his trip to Los Angeles and when he lived there, what happened there, his filmmaking, the women he was with, and then all the way into Las Vegas, and then into what we call the alternate ending of Howard Hughes. So let's walk around here. Well, let's go to try to find this female first, and I'll start talking about his story. You want to?
All right.
All right. So when he was younger, I'm going to just do a little recap. He left Rice University and went to Los Angeles in 1929 with his new bride, Ella Rice. Now that's just number one, right? That's the first woman, the first wife, okay? And she went with them to Los Angeles. And right upon his arriving in Los Angeles, he started into the filmmaking industry and started making and producing films. That's where you start getting the Howard Hughes as producer and filmmaker. Let's walk on this way.
And he produced a lot of movies.
Yes, he did. Yes.
I mean, here I'm scrolling a list right now as we're walking.
Oh, okay.
Of
Yes.
all these
Yeah.
movies.
That's a great one. Yes. And his first one was a flop, but knowing him, and you knew he was a perfectionist, he wasn't going to settle at that. Well, his wife didn't last 2 years in Los Angeles. She said, "You know what? See ya, we don't want to be ya," and gone. She went back to the East Coast. She didn't like it. She didn't like his lifestyle. And then he was already seeing other actresses while he was married to her. So she just left him, divorced him, and went back to the East Coast. With a handsome settlement, though. She didn't do it like free. So she got out of that. Then the two most famous ones that he made was, and I want to talk about, was Hell's Angels. That was the first famous one that really hit the box office big time, and Scarface. If anybody
the
remembers
original
that.
1939 Scarface.
Yes, that's what I'm talking about.
Yeah, the new Scarface with what's his face? I think was it De Niro or whatever.
Yeah, that's not the
garbage.
one we're talking about. We're talking about the one Howard Hughes produced.
That's garbage in comparison.
Big one. Yes, the first big one was the one by Howard Hughes. Then from the 1940s to the 1950s, the Hughes Tool Company, which is what, remember, we talked about this, guys, that he took over his father's company, which was Hughes Tool Company. Okay, that's the first company.
Right, but if we want to back up just a second on that tool company, if you just a few seconds ago, I showed you a clip of this patent that he had for a drill.
Yes.
And what his genius plan was, what really started Hughes Tool Company into becoming like this big conglomerate that it is today, he never would sell the bit. So this was a bit to drill into the ground for oil, whatever, drill into the ground, and he leased it. So he would make them and lease them. So if you needed one, you had to lease it.
So you could rent it, but you would always have to come back
And he
in
owned
and use
the
it.
patent, so, and it was, for the time, that was like massive technology. So, but
Wow.
that was all up there in before his movie stuff.
The tool company that he was running, bought RKO Companies, which during that time was the predecessor to Paramount. Y'all know what Paramount is. Paramount came in right at the end of Howard Hughes leaving RKO, and that's later on in the story.
Right, and that patent was kind of a way to tell you how he had the money.
Yeah, to buy
do that.
something
I mean,
like
it was
that.
just, he was a very, very smart investor.
Yeah. Then when he started RKO, right? Then he got the main, what do you call that, shareholder control of it, of the company, right? And then he got control of their radio station, their news networks, right? And everything that goes along with their media company, the newspapers and everything. He got control of that too. Then in 1948, after he got gaining control of the company of RKO, he got rid of 600 employees right off the bat. And then he had the rest of them investigated for communism.
Twitter.
Oh, he had the rest of them. He started getting the rest of them investigated. Okay?
But I mean, y'all can kind of see the parallels between like Howard Hughes and Elon Musk. Take away all the girls, because you don't hear about Howard or Elon Musk doing all this with girls. But a lot of the lifestyle is very much the same. They're very intelligent. They do a lot of things. They have money that they need for whatever.
Right, and they're also always working with the government.
And they're always working, period.
Right, and Howard Hughes, from the time he moved to Hollywood, he already knew a lot of people. And when he started getting a controlling interest in these groups, then he started working in secret and behind doors with the CIA, with Hoover, and with all of the government agencies too, on top of that. Now, who else does that remind you of?
Again, yeah.
You know, and the Defense Department, another similarity. At the same time, he was with all these women, and you understand, like, he didn't sleep, obviously. He never slept.
Well, I don't know. Some of the women I saw him with, I probably wouldn't have slept either.
Well, by the end of 1953, the investment groups and things like that had got tired of his shenanigans with the companies, with RKO, and they took him to court. Right? And they were like, he's mismanaging the company. He's doing things for his own personal gain. He's getting people investigated and doing things for political reasons. And he probably was, because he was self-serving.
Sounds very familiar to today's background or scenario, too.
At the end of 1954, he said, you know what? I'm done with this. I'm going to concentrate on planes now. So in 1954, he sold it to the General Tire and Rubber Company for $25 million. So he made $2 million off the deal, because he only paid $23 million for controlling interest in the first place.
Oh gosh, that's easy. 20 million today's money.
Okay, and this goes into the women's. So between 1925 and 1960, including 2 wives, he had 42 other women, including Jean Peters, Faye Emerson, Rita Hayworth, and Ava Gardner.
Ava Gardner, yeah.
So that's at least 1 woman a year plus a little on the side. Then we started getting into Hughes aircraft, which we covered when we were walking. We were talking about his aircraft contracts and things like that. But the one thing that nobody remembers and nobody knows about is, and I don't know if anybody knows the story, is he was contracted during World War II to go to help find a German U-sub off the West Coast. It was running up and down California's West Coast. They knew it was out there and they couldn't find it. And they contracted him, they got him at some of his ships and airplanes, and he helped them find that German U-boat. He helped them hunt it down and find it. That's all they said about it. Like, he was, if it wouldn't have been for him, they would have never found that. Now, what would have happened if he wouldn't have helped them find that U-boat?
Oh, there's
and it was up and down our coast off California.
There's no denying that his intelligence and his knowledge of early avionics helped us with the war effort.
Yes.
I mean, because I'm just going to come out and say it, everybody. The Germans are the best when it comes to engineering. I've not... if you look today, most of your better engineered items, especially in the printing industry, have like OSE and these major German names because they're very intelligent. That's why NASA brought the Nazis in after the war to work as space rocket technicians and scientists because of their intelligence. So Howard Hughes definitely helped us with the war effort, because there was a lot of threats during World War II. We had one in the Gulf, the one in California. We actually had one plane that made it into the country.
So he leaves California. He goes to Las Vegas in the early 30s.
And Las Vegas, that was a pretty interesting time for Las Vegas too, because it wasn't Las Vegas yet.
No, it was still developing. But he gets down there, right, and he's still producing movies, guys. He's already into avionics, and he's flying planes and developing things for the military. Look at these. These are old.
Yeah, they are.
Yes. Those are old.
That looks like Roman concrete.
So he gets down there and he decides he wants to start investing in some of these casinos and hotels because he sees they're making big profits, which they are, right? He buys out the Stardust Hotel, which the Howard Hughes Foundation still owns to this day, okay? And he lives in the penthouse of the, he hated crowds, he hated people, he hated the city, and he had the penthouse to himself, and nobody was allowed in except the aides, right? So he's up there in the penthouse by himself because he hates people, but he's in Las Vegas because it's a good business investment. And he has to be on the ground floor when his business investments are going through. So he's living in Las Vegas. Now, here we go. Here we're going to enter in Watergate and where he came into that. Okay, so presumably, like, he was accused of this.
There's a lot of speculation with Watergate, and I personally don't think that he had as much involvement in Watergate as people want to give him credit for. I'm not saying he didn't politicize a little bit for his gain, because if you look especially at the contracts he had with the Air Force and other branches of the government, they kind of screwed him at times. I mean, they wrung him over the coals for where the money went. And at the end of those investigations, well, as we said just a little bit ago, the man put his own money in. So, I mean, was he that heavily involved in Watergate? I don't know.
No, I think he was indirectly involved, and I'll tell you how I think that. Because when he was in Las Vegas, like I said, he was already a paranoid person, right? He was a germophobic. He wanted to be left alone. They said the whole time he was in that hotel, you know, he never opened his drapes. When they went into his room after he left Las Vegas, those drapes had been in the same position they were when he went in that room. He never opened them, okay? He liked it dark. He liked to be alone, and he was a germaphobe. Well, right outside of Las Vegas, they opened a Nevada test site for nuclear test site right outside of Las Vegas. He went nuts, like, no, because they're going to use radiation. And the Army said, we're not using radiation. These are just test bombs. We're just testing them. And he didn't believe them. So he tried every way he could, and he did not have the political pull to get them to stop it. They wouldn't stop it. So what did he do? He had money, and he realized people liked money. So he tried to bribe Lyndon B. Johnson first with $1 million bribe, and it didn't work. Johnson didn't take the bribe. Nixon steps up and says, you know what? Yeah, I'll take his money. He took his money, he still didn't do anything. Because what is he going to do?
Right.
Right? You took $1 million and you're not going to do anything. And then Nixon's like, what are you going to tell him? I stole $1 million from you?
But at the end of the day, it's written down as a donation, it's tax deductible. So
And see, that's what Nixon said. So what did he say? You just took $1 million from me, and I like money, and I don't like what you did. So I'm going to get you back. And here we go. He goes, I know a lot of people who would like to know what Nixon's up to. So he leaked a lot of information. So indirectly, he was part of the reason that Nixon was investigated at Watergate.
Some of the movies that he did, especially, you know, that you saw going across the list before, like Sinbad, they've redone a lot of his movies because they were good scripts. They were interesting movies. What I love is he did a lot of like military-esque films for the day, and he participated in some of the daredevil stunts.
He did. Well, that also banged up his body a lot, though. It really did. So here we are in Las Vegas, and he's already a recluse. He's already a germaphobe. He's already got neurosyphilis from all the women he was sleeping with, right? So he's sick, he's hurting, and he wants to be alone. And that's where we enter in. He couldn't get the bribe to go through. He decides, I'm just going to go move to Nicaragua. That's what he did. Why there? I don't know. But he wanted to be somewhere where he was alone and in solitude, and he thought that was the place. So he went down there. She enters in Nicaragua, guys. So let's find out if we can find her.
Gone with the Wind.
Right here in this big open area in the center of the graveyard. They have some enslaved people buried here. and they don't have any headstones, but they left it open right here for them. So all this open area right here that we're walking on.
Don't bump that headstone out of place.
Let's go look at this. So all of this open area right here and right there, right? Up there?
Yes. Yeah, that whole open area right there.
Yeah. Let's go.
That's a very interesting fact about this graveyard.
I'm glad they're respectful to that and they know the history. I think this is it right here. Okay, so Eva McClellan, guys, the story with her is we said that he went down to Nicaragua, right? And he was sick. He was addicted to drugs. His mental health was bad and he was fighting neurosyphilis. He was really depressed. He had OCD. He was fighting neurosyphilis and he wanted to be secluded. He went down to Nicaragua, right? He was there for about 2 weeks and a 6.8 earthquake hit. Well, he said, you know what? I'm gonna go somewhere where there's no earthquake. He went up to the Bahamas and bought an island. Okay, and it's still there. The Xanadu Resort, and it's still owned by the Hughes Corporation. Okay, it's an island. He had his own island, his own house, and it was just his by himself. He hired this woman named Eva, who happened to be down there. She was a medical person, she was a nurse. And he had a private bodyguard that worked with the CIA named Music, and he was with him. So she helped him get back to health. She helped him find God. She helped him attain spirituality. She helped his body get well, right? Then when he started getting well, get mentally well, get physically well, he decided he wanted the type of life that she had. And what type of life is that? Look at this, guys. See this out here? I want you to look at that farm.
Oh, just be quiet for a minute. And that's what you hear here pretty much all day.
You see that farm is a good example of a little home and a farm that they had. Okay? So he come back here with her where she was from. It settled in Troy, Alabama. And they said Howard Hughes was peaceful and calm, and he still run his businesses under an assumed name, Nick Nicely. And they asked him why Nick Nicely. And they said because he was a bodyguard or an agent or someone that took a bullet for him, literally took a bullet for him and died for him. So when he took on his alias, he took on Nick Nicely, which was the dead CIA agent. That wasn't supposed to exist in the first place, so it wasn't like the name was used. Then he moved here to Troy, Alabama with her. And he lived for 25 years down here in Troy, Alabama with Eva. And he passed away in 2001. They said that that's the real Howard Hughes alternative ending. And she passed away 2 years later and she's buried here.
But you know what? I think we need to just pick up again with the actual ending.
We're talking about Howard Hughes. He created a whole empire in Las Vegas. A lot of things happened there just because of Howard Hughes. All right, in California, in Hollywood, he was already producing movies, and we talked about that. And then his movie company, his movie studio went under, and he had to stop producing movies. But the reason that it went under was this. Right before they left Hollywood and he moved to Las Vegas, and it was mainly because he was crashing, guys. He was having mental breakdown, okay? What precipitated that whole move and really caused a decline, a visible decline in Howard Hughes that everyone could see? He went into a movie studio, his movie studio, and it was RKO Studios, and we talked about that. And he went into the studio, and for 4 months, he didn't come out. He sat in this darkened screening room in the studio, and he screened the movies day in and day out. And he would only eat chocolate candy bars and chocolate drinks and coffee, and he sat around naked. And he grew his hair out and his nails out because he said that the disease, the neurosyphilis, or the nerve pain that he was having, he couldn't have clothes and things touch his body. So they said that he would sit in this darkened screen room for 20 hours at a time, naked, nothing but something over a washcloth over his midsection. And so his aides and stuff would come in and out, bringing his food and things like that. But you was not allowed to talk to him. You wasn't allowed to interfere with him or to interject with him at all. And so that precipitated, and when he come out of that is when his investors and his own, stockholders for the movie director company pulled out because they were like, he's crazy and he's unstable and we cannot, invest in him. So they kind of like pulled their investment out of RKO Studios. So he moves to Las Vegas, all right? And here's the beginning of what a lot of people said that they don't understand why he was so crazy acting and the things that happened. But we'll walk this way. I want y'all to look at this when we're walking and talking. This is a cemetery out here, and we're covering the end of his life. So I wanted to be right here near the cemetery. At this point in his life, and this is going to be the late 50s, he'd have been in a lot of crashes. His body was banged up. He had broken a lot of his bones, because we talked about that he test piloted his own things. He test drove his own things. They didn't have crash test dummies, he didn't use them, right? He always tested his own products first. And sometimes that was good and sometimes that was bad. What that led to, though, between the neurosyphilis and the body injuries and everything that was going on with him was drug usage. And we see that nowadays, don't we? We see a lot of people that get addicted to pain medication because of injuries. You start off with an injury to your body and you're on a pain medication. You become addicted to that pain medication and then you can't get off of it. Well, Howard Hughes already had so much going on in his life. He was involved in Hollywood, and we already know, guys, Hollyweird, right?
Pretty much.
Gets a lot of people addicted to drugs and sexual indiscretions and bad behavior overall. And he had submitted to all of it. He was partying, he was sleeping with a bunch of women, he was doing drugs, he was doing all of that, and then he had that crash, right? He moves to Las Vegas and he's addicted to codeine. And he has it in his head that he's gonna buy up a bunch of casinos and hotels and start making some money. Well, because he had a fondness to Texas, right? And everything dealing with Texas. He just loved Texas, and he loved Houston, right? He started buying up every casino and hotel chain in Las Vegas that was founded in Texas. Only Texas. Like these hotels, like the Desert Inn, for instance, he bought it, founded in Texas. Okay, and that's one of the oldest casino and inns down there. A lot of the casinos and inns down there that you see that Howard Hughes Foundation bought, which they still own to this day, his foundation still owns, were bought by him in the 50s when he moved to Las Vegas. All right? So he started buying up a bunch of these properties, and on Thanksgiving Day in 1966 is when he moved into the Desert Inn's penthouse. The 8th floor became the center of his empire while he was building up his enterprises in Las Vegas. And the thing about that is, he had the whole floor occupied. And guys, I'm telling you, as someone who's worked in the hotel industry a lot, and the famous people that come through there, the chaos that causes, and Howard Hughes, on top of that, was so eccentric and so weird and so demanding about certain things that it really made the hotel, it was an inconvenience to have him there. Even though he had all this money, even though he had all this influence, he was so weird and so different, and it was like chaos to the hotel.
Right, and I guess the best way to say it again is socially awkward.
Yeah, the Desert Inn hotel people said, okay, we're tired of you, so we want you to leave. He said, no, I'm not going to leave, I'm going to buy the hotel. And that's what he did. He bought the hotel he was staying in and made it one of his incorporations. And he stayed there. And that's where he was staying. Then he would move to different penthouses around Las Vegas as he was buying them to test it out, to test the hotel, to test the casino, to make sure it was going to be profitable. Because he was OCD. He had to be there. He had to make sure that it was being done to his standards, that it was being done correctly, the way that he would want it. And so that's what he was doing. Then he married, we talked about earlier in his life, he married a woman a year after his father died in 1925. when he decided to move to LA in 1927, she said that no, she wasn't going to move to LA, and she divorced him and moved to Texas. Okay? He goes and he marries Jean Peters again. Now, this is many years later. We're in Las Vegas, and he's doing that, and he marries a woman named Jean Peters, right? And that was in 1970. And at that moment, he was living at the, it says the Intercontinental Hotel in Las Vegas. And it's been renamed now or torn down. But he was staying there, and a huge earthquake hit, all right? When that earthquake hit, someone that nervous and someone like him that prepares for everything, that thinks about everything, he never took into account earthquakes, never thought about it, never planned for it, and something that disruptive. He was sitting in his penthouse and a 6.5 hit. The next day, the next morning, he packed up his whole enterprise, left Las Vegas, and went down to the Panama Canal. I'm not saying Panama City, Panama Canal. He went down to Nicaragua, around that area, guys, and bought him a whole place right there. It was like a penthouse, and he named it Zandu Beach Resort, right? And that's where he was living there for 4 years. So he got run out of Las Vegas, not by the people, not by anything like that. An earthquake, guys, an earthquake shook him up so much that he said, I'm not doing it. So he was living in the Panama Canal, we know that, and he was living down there in the Grand Bahamas, and he was married to this Jean woman. He starts growing his hair out again, not cutting his nails again. He goes back through another mental breakdown. And I'm guessing that's because he had his hands busy so much, and he was busy so much in so many things, and all of a sudden, he's not. He's just on this little island, and he only has his aides and stuff around him, and he has nothing to do. He's still running some business stuff, but he's got nothing to do but think. And he had a total breakdown. Okay?
Right, and this was after all the Watergate stuff.
This was after
okay, so
all
so this
of that.
is so he's had all these stresses. So that's important. We gotta make sure.
He's running right now.
I mean, right,
and he's trying to recluse
himself. And there's only two reasons you're going to move in this world.
Yeah.
One, it's a great financial opportunity, or two, you're running from something.
Right, and Howard Hughes didn't need the money. He was still getting money in from his business. He wanted peace and quiet. He wanted to be by himself. And when that happened and he got by himself, he totally went downhill. And he started shooting, coding all the time. He started drinking. He started using various other drugs. He was letting his fingernails grow out again, his hair grow out again. He refused to bathe, things like that. And his aides, this is the thing about rich people, guys, and you can say what you want to. Well, when they passed away, they had private nurses and aides. Okay, maybe they did. Do those people care about them? Do they? Do they really care about them? Because I'm going to say no, based on Howard Hughes. This part of the story is written. He was going downhill. He slipped into a coma, which can happen if you're putting your body through that kind of thing. He went to sleep, and he wasn't being responsive. He was breathing, but he wasn't being responsive. And instead of calling the doctor, instead of trying to get him to a hospital or fly him to a hospital, they decided inject him with more codeine. Someone who cared about him would have called medical assistance, would have started anything, done any kind of medical solution they could to preserve his life. That's not what they did. Instead, they injected him with more codeine, and then they waited. How long they waited, I don't know. Maybe there was a doctor there, maybe there wasn't. Maybe they were watching his pulse rate, knew how long he had, and if they pretended to try to get him to a hospital, he would still die anyways. They put him on a plane when he would not be, after 2 or 3 days in this coma, and he wouldn't come out of it. They put him on a plane and decided they were going to head back toward Houston. En route to Houston, from the Bahamas, he died on the plane. This is 1976, okay? He lands in Houston. They take his body to a coroner. The autopsy said that he had 3 syringes broken off in his arm, in his skin, embedded in the meat in his arm. He had kidney failure. He was 90 pounds and he was 6'4". 90 pounds at 6'4". His hair was below his shoulders. His fingernails were out really, really long. His body looked so emaciated and starved to death that they had to do fingerprint ID to make sure it was Howard Hughes. The feds had to do that, or this is what's in the report, anyways. And that he died, and that was Howard Hughes right there, and that he died. And they have a memorial to him in Houston. So, guys, I'm going to end this, and I'm going to say one thing that really affected me. Reading the whole story, I read so many facts and so many things about him. It was insane. But the one thing that's really stuck out to me, and I've always believed this, that money does not make you happy, and it doesn't make you a rich person, right? I think it was Walter Cronkite. I'm not even sure if it's Walter Cronkite. I know it was Time Magazine interviewed Howard Hughes. The journalist that interviewed Howard Hughes come away from it, and the last thing that he said about Howard Hughes is he was the poorest man he knew. And I want y'all to think about that statement, and when you think about Howard Hughes.